I'm David. I'm an alcoholic, and thank you so much for asking me to speak. I was going to uh, start off the recording saying, and that's how I made my first $1 million, as Clancy used to talk about, because the recording didn't really get the whole answer. Anyhow, I'm very humbled to be here. I heard that Steve T, the um, helper of this group, had kidney problems, and I've been listening to Daily Ponderables or reading Daily Ponderables ever since like the Dark Ages. And when I heard, I was devastated. So I started talking to him, and then I told him my sobriety date was August 23rd of 79, and he was a little bit more curious, and he asked me to speak, and I said, out of 2,200,000 people, yet I've asked me, because I'm sort of Mr. Cellophane, as they talk about in Chicago, the musicals Chicago, because probably no one listens to me, no one wants to know about me, and no one really at this time looks at me the same as they did when I came in. Uh, I really wish Steve was here, and I wish him well. He's tired tonight, so. I love him dearly, and I hope he gets his kidneys. And I know everybody on this uh, Zoom platform wishes him well. I had my birthday, my belly button birthday is June 17th, 1952, and it's also known for Bunker Hill Day, Watergate break-in, and OJ's Bronco ride. And then later on, it happened to be a stroke on my belly button birthday. I had a stroke at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't move my left side, and decided I was going to call the 911, and had to relearn to talk and walk and all that type of stuff. And my brain was there was a library back here that I couldn't reach. Unfortunately, slowly but surely, I've been developing that. So if my uh, thinking goes a little askew, please forgive me, but understand it. Uh, I really don't make excuses much in AA. I came to realize my recovery is my own responsibility. I got sober as a result of being thrown out of my house because my wife had heard about an affair I had had. I was more afraid of my father-in-law than anything in my life, and he was Italian from the Bronx, and he was connected, and I really came in like John Keefe used to say, I came into AA the day before I died. And I truly, really believe that, if it wasn't looking at myself and being disgusted of who is this person I had become. If I was in New York, I would have jumped off a tall building. But unfortunately, I called my brother, and my brother was about 2.5 years sober in here in AA. And my understanding of AA was they helped people like him, and he was sort of put out to pasture with all you folk that couldn't drink and have fun anymore, like me. And I was quite delusional as I came to realize. I went into a rehab called Second Chance, and I don't really believe it was a second chance. It's a second chance that I have to build up my own life, my recovery, but it's an opportunity in one life to live two lifetimes, and I came to realize I really didn't believe I was an alcoholic when I first came in. I thought I was a heavy drinker. I could give it up any time. And Scotty, the guy who ran the rehab, was about 17 years sober, and he said, "Okay, well, why don't we find out if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict? Because Alcoholics Anonymous is for alcoholics, and NA is for Narcotics Anonymous." And he really emphasized the singleness of purpose there, and they're quite serious back then. And he introduced me to AA as the rubber ducky syndrome. And he said, "Well, why don't we put the booze aside like a little rubber ducky and see if you miss it at all? And since you're so avid, you're not an alcoholic. You could easily do 90 meetings in 90 days and not miss the drink at all." And so I was a daily drinker by then, and I came to realize I was going to prove him wrong. I was that delusional. And I came to realize in 4 days I was a real alcoholic. I won't go into long detail because 45 days for 45 years sober is a lot to put into 45 minutes if I'm or 4 hours and 45 minutes if I'm lucky. Anyhow, I came to realize an alcoholic, and these people in front of me were demonstrating this recovery. And back in those days, it was, you know, an awareness that, some people don't make it, and some people drink and relapse and don't make it back. And that was really serious stuff because I knew that if I took a drink, it would trigger a craving, and I didn't know where that craving would take me. I didn't know if I was going to be delusional enough to say, screw it, it's not going to work for me, or I can't go back to AA, or any of those rationalizations and justifications that alcoholics use. But I came to realize I was a real alcoholic, and I went up to Scotty and said, Scotty, thank you for saving my life. And Scotty said what a nice, real alcoholic sponsor or person would say. I didn't, I didn't do anything. I just was asked, all we're asking you, Dave, is once you get sober, that you pass it on. And I came to realize that there were a lot of people out in this world that needed the identification of an alcoholic. And so I was sort of given a vision back then in early recovery about, of dear friends of mine that would need it, and I could help them get this sober. Once I get sober, I knew how to get sober, but I had no idea about how to get sober back then. And my first day out of rehab, my thinking was, my God, I can't stay sober out here on my own. And my stinking thinking came back. Who's going to know what's one drink? Maybe you jumped the gun. All that weird, sick thinking. But I saw four people sitting on a curb, passing a bottle in front of me, and this wasn't this was up in New York, Westchester County, so um, it wasn't a Bowery or anything like that. But I looked at those people and I said, if I took a drink, I'd be lucky to be sitting on a curb passing a bottle with buddies of mine, but I have no clue where it would take me. So I was really scared, and I went to a meeting that night and was was introduced to a very strong tough love group called the Crow Hill Group, and they didn't take anything less than serious. They had a solid home group that I will get into that a little later, but they really put a value on this recovery type stuff, and they really took it seriously, and they weren't going to take any crap from me. And they had a lot of outgoing meetings, which I was getting involved in. And amazingly enough, 45 days sober, my wife invites me back home. And I thought, my God, this AA stuff really works, man. She's going to invite me home after having an affair. And so I was told to go down to Atlanta where she lived and to do 90 meetings in 90 days because I was moving into a new area, and get a sponsor, and to really be committed to this recovery first. And so I went down to Atlanta, and she thought she was not willing to go to Al-Anon. So her idea of AA was I was all sane and sober, and I was going to be the man that she wanted me to be. And she wanted babies right then and there. And I said, I'm not going to bring a child in this world until this relationship gets right. Because I don't really know if we're really connected at this point. I don't really think it's fair to the child. If we go our separate ways, we have to be stuck together for no healthy reason. And I was quite serious about Al-Anon. Long story short, she went to Al-Anon 7 years later after she divorced me, and she had remarried an alcoholic, and had been told by her best friend who went to Al-Anon and said, "Now, your father was an alcoholic. Now your first husband was an alcoholic. Now your second husband an alcoholic, and you don't think that you're affected by alcoholism, So she went to Al-Anon, but it didn't really stick because she stayed with that um, second husband until for 16 years, unwilling or unable to to detach from him because she, for some sick reason, thought that her purpose was there. And so many people think that they are connected and they really can't detach. And I came to realize that detachment from non-alcoholic marriage was hard enough. I came to realize it was uh, 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 an awareness of my honesty. How can I um, expect her to stay with me, somebody who's had an affair and it was an ugly affair and all that type of stuff. So how can I expect her to like me anymore, except, for some odd, desperate reason. And she really didn't understand my alcoholism. And so I didn't really realize that she was really connecting to me. She was connecting with an idea of me. And so I was able to finally divorce her and move back up to New York. And I got involved in this uh, group called Crow Hill. Anyhow, back up a little bit. When I was down in Atlanta, my first sponsor was a guy who was talking about don't drink and go to meetings, and that's all he really talked about. And finally, um, I came to realize he hadn't put the steps in his life, and he was sponsoring out of line because he was it's easy to ask to be a sponsor, but it's hard to be a genuine sponsor. I come to realize, somebody with the steps in his life. He had a resentment towards his wife. He had been married before, and I identified with him. He was married, but I was prepared to get a divorce, and so, but he had never done his fourth step. And I said, screw this, because my life was on the line. I wanted to be sure I got the real message. I remember Scotty talking about this phone game, the old phone game. You whisper something in somebody's ear, and they whisper their partner next to them, and finally goes around the room, and it's like Joe Schmo blows mother, blah, blah, blah. It's totally delusional. It's totally wrong information. So I came to realize, by being in AA, so many people were not with the program, not with the steps in their life. They were newcomers or they were old timers that were manipulating or lying. They were bullshitting their way into recovery. And I came to realize, my God, I came to see that there was a guy named Joe Phelan down in Atlanta who was a delegate in AA who was 33 years sober, and his sponsor's sponsor was Dr. Bob, and I didn't figure it had been too watered down by that lineage. So I asked him to be my sponsor, and he was a wonderful man. He was very but much by the book, and my relationship with him was short-lived by face-to-face type of relationship, but we kept in touch, and he came up to New York, and I would go up to the conferences with him every year for 5 years or so. He became a trustee, and he was an invaluable member of my life. I moved back down to Atlanta God sort of directed me to move down to Atlanta to work for a publishing company, and I was able to make amends to my ex-wife at that point, and that was a miraculous thing too. Um, uh, I sort of said, when I did my inventory, I said, I'd be amazed to see how God's going to work this thing out, because she ain't talking to me and I ain't talking to her, So, how's this going to be a healthy, harmonious dialogue? And briefly, I'll shortly tell you the story. I had $265 in my savings account, and I had also realized in my inventory that I had trouble with money. When I had money, I got cocky. When I didn't have money, I stole, and that's quite simple. And so I prayed about having just $265. And the next day I came out to the mailbox and there was a bill there from this department store for $265. And so I decided to pay the money and send her the receipt with a note saying I paid this money. I hope it gets you over a hurdle, because there's no alimony that was able to be friendly and understanding as much as she could. Um, and so that opened up a dialogue between the two of us. And um, next phone call was, Dave, I got a problem. And now I was about a year and a half in AA, and I was a counselor, advisor. And I said, well, what's your problem? And she goes, my roommate's going to get married in 31 days. And this guy I've been dating wants to move in with me. What should I do? And my brain thought, what the hell are you calling me about your sex life for? But my mouth sort of said, you don't have to make a decision for something 31 days down the road. Look at your options. We never had a healthy relationship of communication. If you're going to make a commitment, as moving in is like getting married, you've got to be sure that you're doing the right thing instead of just rushing into this thing, because you made one mistake once before, and you don't really want to make another one shortly after. And I humorously said, I'm not moving down to Atlanta, so I can't room with you. And yeah, a week later, I got a letter from a book publishing coming down in Atlanta saying, come down immediately. Georgia's just won their university championship football, and we want you to design a book. So I came down to design a book, and I stayed down there for 9 months. And I made amends to my ex-wife and all that healthy. And I reintroduced myself to Joe Phelan. Joe was a trustee back then, and he said one weekday, he said, what are you going to do this weekend? And he goes, I don't know. I go to a meeting. And he said, no, you're going to go to a regional forum. Have you ever been to a regional forum? I said, well, you're going to go. It's up in some Augusta, Georgia, or Macon, Georgia, and you bring 3 or 4 people, and you come to find what this aspect of AA is. And I went up, and they were having an election that weekend, and it was an amazing experience because I came to realize there was a whole new dimension to AA that I had not really seen on the group level. And so I went, after my 9 months, I went back up to New York, and I became the alternate GSR. And as a result, I became a GSR eventually. And these people would just sit around the room. We were up in Bill Wilson's old town territory of Bedford Hills, New York. And we're in Mount Kisco, New York, a local town. And all the people were sitting around the room complaining about no one wants to be a GSR, no one wants to do this service. They just don't want to be committed, blah, blah, blah. And we were reading the traditions every month because with their complaining. And eventually I became a DCM because of Joe Phelan's dialogue with me. I was learning all about service work, and I was talking to Clarence Roberts down in Atlanta, who was an old timer, first delegate of AA. When I wanted to join AA, I wanted to be sure I got the real message instead of a diluted message or a warped message, from somebody else. So I really became a history buff about AA. And when I became DCM, I said, well, from now on, we're not going to read these traditions every month. We're gonna start committees. And the first guy complaining raised his hand and said, well, we don't know anything. I was, well, you're going to be the chairperson of this committee. We're allowed to be beginners because this has been fallen by the wayside. And we are district, blah, blah, blah. I forget the district number. We're not Connecticut, who has their whole act together. They've built the foundation strongly, and they are Connecticut districts. But we are our own district, and we got to answer to ourselves because we we are new to this, and we're only 50 miles away from New York, uh, where trustees were coming in by the handful every month and for business. And so we invited all these trustees to come out and discuss the traditions. And we had David Aronofsky talk about traditions, and we had all these people talk about different committees and blah, blah, blah. So we were very teachable, and we were helping to inform the groups, and the GSRs were going back to the group. And long story short, we became 59 groups in that district, and we had to redistrict it. They uh, so I come to realize when you're asked in AA, you got to follow your responsibility of that role of AA. If you're even in the level of sponsorship, you got to live up to that role of sponsorship. But uh, as Billy Noonan or Billy Ann, excuse me, sorry, you might want to erase that. Um, he talks about the group is really defined in the pamphlet, the group, the AA group, because a lot of groups start off and they don't know, they're just going to wing it. They're going to be hip and smart and slick and all that type of stuff. And unfortunately, I've observed that they've become glamorous meetings rather than a real group, because I come to realize what a group truly asks of us to be responsible for. I'll go into that a little bit later. Um, so I moved back. During that time, I came to realize I listened to these cassette tapes of Charlie and Joe, and uh, was really realizing that we weren't discussing the big book as effectively as they were. So I would have people come over to my house and we'd listen to Charlie and Joe tapes, and half the people would say, "Oh, that's not what my sponsor says. I don't really need to hear that crap." And other people really fell in love with them. And eventually I went up to the uh, conference up in Montreal in 1985, and Joe was the last speaker at that conference. And I came to realize, hey, I went up to a trustee, a friend of mine, uh, and said, "Hey, James, I just heard Joe McQuaney," and he said, "We just booked him in to come to New York in 1988. How do you like to be on the committee?" And I became the committee. With our district, we orchestrated the whole thing. We got the speaker, we got the meeting place and all that. We had 600 people spoon-fed by Charlie and Joe, the big book, and we shifted into a whole new level of understanding of the big book and all that type of stuff. Um, Unfortunately, we depend too much on the word of mouth in AA, because that phone game of the word of mouth becomes distorted. I think it's our responsibility to bring back the value of all these uh, positions in AA, and I'll try and get to that if I have any more time later on. So we had Charlie and Joe, and we were getting into a, a time where we were being exposed with the young people's groups, and Billy N really talks about that. We are um, the young people were going to the icky pa type stuff, and they were carrying teddy bears and all that type stuff, and wearing pajamas, and they were really sort of defiant, and they were trying to reinvent AA for the young people, and it was a very difficult time. And also we got introduced to the inner child, and the inner child, um, Mr. John B, uh, you know, caused us to maybe disband our group, because so many people are trying to say AA's old hat. Now it's the issues of blah, blah, blah. I won't go into all that type of stuff. But I think, we have our things that go on in life in AA that are going to make us deter us from our path, and they really are dangerous to AA and to ourselves and to our wellness. And um, so later on, we had we had some money left over from Charlie and Joe, so we decided we were going to do workshops, and uh, guy we were introduced to a guy named Joe Hawk, who was a, a tough, a difficult person. He was challenging us to uh, certain values and um, wonderful values. I came to realize, he was sort of like Clancy. He talked about the singleness of purpose and God and being the the God of our own understanding, but God being uh, uh, a loving God expressing himself in our group conscience. And that's what we really needed to answer to, instead of to these other people uh, that had different ideas about uh, AA, and we're trying to reinvent AA and all that type of stuff. So we had Joe Hawk, and Joe had said, you got to hear my sponsor. He's going to come up with Rhode Island, so why don't you go up to see him? And I was introduced to a guy named Don P. And Don was this. When you met him, you said, "How the hell do you get up there? My God!" I really was attracted by his quality of recovery, and I came to ask him to be my sponsor. And I was brought up in AA in New York, and they believe that you should only work the first 9 steps once, and you live in the maintenance steps of 10, 11, and 12. And Don was of a different experience, and he said, "Well, I do the steps over every year to come to realize I need to surrender to the first step, and I got to come to find what my guidance is in that year, because the the last year is over, and you need to resubmit yourself to this process every year." And I said, "Well, I don't understand that." And he says, "Well," and I explained to him that people in my area said, "You live in the maintenance steps." And he goes, "Oh, were you sold on that, or do you know that from your own experience?" And I said, "I've never done the steps before, so I must have been sold on it, or maybe you're right, or maybe you're wrong." So I found this guy named Bob F. To go through the steps with me. And I said, "Bob, I'm going to go through the steps, and I'd love to have you listen to me when I share with you my first step experience and second step. And so why don't we meet every Tuesday?" Uh, and so we met that next Tuesday, and I shared with him my first step experience, and he says, "I want to do this too." I said, "No, you're supposed to listen to me. You're not." And we came to realize we both needed to go through the steps again. And so we worked it together, where we would get together and swap first step and second step and third step and all that type of stuff. And we were just amazed that the process that we had done the first time, we had missed certain things in inventory. We're told that person doesn't need to make amends because you want to get in her pants, or you want to do this. And instead of me changing to address the issue, I was eliminating the problem altogether. So I came to realize I needed to make amends to that person. Even I needed to change my character to apologize for my poor behavior back then, because it became morally discomforting to me to go along with that game that I played on that person, or that manipulation I played on that other person. So we made him. We were amazed when we were told by Don to go through the steps to turn statements into questions. We looked at the promises, and we asked ourselves, were we amazed before we were halfway through? And we were freaking amazed, because there was so much new joy and exploration that that had been missed the first time going around, and we were just settling to go around the drain and that type of stuff. And so I got very active in the Fellowship of the Spirit conference, and we went out there to Colorado for 3 or 4 years, and we were and loved Don, loved Bobo, and Don C, and all those wonderful people that really have a great message. And we just lost a guy named Charlie P last 2 years ago. Tragically, he finally left us, and I miss all these wonderful people because as you get older, these people sort of pass away, and you only have great memories of this whole thing. Anyhow, my real concern these days, I went one time. Sandy Beach came up to talk in Hilton Head, and I see thumbs up there. Sandy Beach, I first heard on tape when I was 4 days sober, and I laughed from my belly so hard. And his sponsor told him, "All we're trying to do, Sandy, is take the manageability of your life out of the hands of an idiot." And I came to realize, my best thinking got me here, and I was an idiot. I was delusional. Uh, I was misinformed. I was misguided by the bullshit in the bar and all that crap. And I think Sandy spoke, and he had a workshop, and we were at question and answers, and I said, I'd like to ask this question, when are we going to invite God back into AA? And he said, "Oh, that's a very interesting question. A lot of people like try and play God." And I said, "There's really no group conscience, effective group conscience in AA today. All their all the meetings around here, as Billy sort of talks about, is they're glamorous meetings, and they have a business meeting or group conscience every quarter or whatever. You know, uh, Back in the Crow Hill group, we had a business meeting every month. We had to keep a pulse of that group, and we had commitments that had to be rotated, and people had to be assigned jobs of set up and clean up, and those jobs you don't see people volunteering too much these days, and only the diehard people will do them, and they want to keep AA alive, but they don't realize that we really need to ask the member of a group to participate in that involvement with a group, and not just uh, have one person do the job. And all these people that really feel that their ego is uh, invaluable too. Uh, Being a great circuit speaker is really not what I've come to realize. I'm sort of I could identify with that Mr. Cellophane. That person is really no one hears, no one wants to hear, because AA has really sort of lost their uh, conscience, so to speak. I don't think we've lost their value. I go to a lot of meetings on Zoom, and I'm getting disheartened because I come to realize there are 400 and some odd members of this group. They are people that come to listen to this person, but they're not an AA group. They are uh, carrying the message to NAGA, whatever it is, XA and AA, but they don't define themselves an AA group. And I really think that it's uh, washed, watered down, and because I've really come to realize I could identify with another alcoholic when I could not identify with another drug addict. And when we get that other message going on, it's very confusing. And the beautiful thing about AA is the identification value. And without that identification, I think we're lost, and we're um, ineffective. And I think, as Billy Answer says, there's 100 people out there that need 100 isms, solutions to their isms, but there are only 10 people out there that are like me. I'm an alcoholic. I have this alcoholism, and what makes me identify with an alcoholic is that phenomenon of craving once I take the drink, not the drug, and not the confusion of the drug. I was introduced to AA and also the synergistic theory of one Valium and one beer does not make one and one make two, but the synergistic theory defines one and one make a minimum of seven or five. And Karen Quinlan went into a coma with one beer and one Valium. And I'm not saying she was an alcoholic or anything like that, but that's just the combination of drugs. And I did a lot of drugs, but I came to realize I'm a real alcoholic. And I had to come to realize that is my message to AA and my only message in AA. I don't really need to say I'm a drug addict. I respect AA's opinion about drugs, but I'm both. And then they go on the drug-a-log and all that type of stuff. So I hope many people uh, heard what I'm trying to say, or maybe half the people left. But I really think that we're going through a difficult time as the fourth edition reads, that we are coming to new opportunities to carry the message. But we as a group need to uh, hold on to the reins of what we're carrying the message to. I think if you're ever up in New York and you go to the Leonard Park group up in Westchester County, they're a great, wonderful example of a group. And they, when I was a member of the group, when you did your 90 meetings in 90 days, you had to qualify before you celebrated your 90 days. So you got up in another group and you told your story in 15 minutes, and that was about it. And that was about all that you really were able to share at that time. But, if you wanted to speak for the group, you had to be nurtured in the group to be able to have that responsibility of that role. And you're really, there's a group up down in New York, was a tough love group that said if you're up at the podium and you speak of drugs, we'll take you off the podium because we don't want to hear that crap. And they're quite serious about that too. So you had to either be willing to tell your whole story and focus on the alcohol, excuse me, or just not be able to speak at the meeting. So I think the value of a home group, of a loving God expressing himself, or a group conscience, takes the individual out of the equation and allows the group to present the members of the group. And that I had a great pride in being a member of the Crow Hill group. We went around talking, and we were carrying the message, and we were bringing the message into rehabs and all that type of stuff. And there's a certain pride that you walked away saying, had I done my job, had I really carried the message for AA, or had I sort of rambled on here and there. Unfortunately, I was at a meeting about a week ago, and I had gotten sober down in Atlanta, and I sort of asked this woman, did she know Biscayne Maggie? And she goes, oh, she used to come to our group and tell us our group wasn't carrying the message. And, I could tell by her quality of sobriety, observing that she really was missed the boat about AA and the value of surrendering to a higher power and working this program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and not bringing the barroom BS into AA. Anyhow, if I've disturbed some of you, I'll say that you can put my name on the inventory and follow it up by resentment, and come to realize maybe it wasn't truly me, but my loving concern of AA and where we're going in my life and what I've observed as non-AA. I thank you for your time and your patience, and Love you all.